Well, welcome back. This is presentation 1 of chapter 15, foreign policy. This is the last of the chapters that we're going to deal with in this text. And of course, foreign policy is an enormously complicated, it's got historical context, big subject. I actually teach a 16-week course semester on it, so let's jump in. Here are the key topics. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about the goals of foreign policy, how different political institutions shape foreign policy, the tools of foreign policy, and certain challenges that the United States faces as a country. Here are the 4 things that we think you ought to get out of this chapter. Again, I'll assume you can read. All right, let's jump in. So in 2017, Donald Trump issued an executive order that banned travel from the United States or to the United States from several countries. These were mostly Muslim countries. Different Americans had different views on Trump's travel ban. If you're Amanda Patrick from Georgia, 38-year-old tax associate with a young son, you think the ban is a good idea because you're worried about potential terrorists coming into the country. If you're Mohammed Iya, an American citizen born in Somalia, you find yourself with your family separated, stuck abroad. I had family members. I've got an in-law who married a really beautiful, sweet woman from Guatemala. They have kids together. They're married. She had to go back to the home country for a period of time. Again, the big part of this is what role does the law play in this? The Supreme Court ultimately upheld the travel ban in Trump v. Hawaii. But the ban took on greater significance as the coronavirus affected countries around the world, and Trump actually expanded the travel ban. This was, and again, if you were a student from one of the countries that where you were banned, you probably were left, if you had to go home, you wouldn't be able to come back if you were on a student visa. So again, these are examples of some of the complex issues that are addressed in foreign policy that to some extent also have a domestic, implication as well. So foreign trade and security are important issues that are, again, important for the American economy. Again, we get a lot of goods, we get a lot of people. A lot of people are not aware that, we're not, the American natural birth rate is not enough to keep the economy churning around. We need a certain amount of immigration. Countries that have really strict, like Japan, they have a really strict immigration policy. They have demographic realities where they're not reproducing their population so that their population is growing. So their economy is really confronting a lot of serious challenges. So foreign trade raises really complicated issues. America's interests and those of foreign countries are increasingly closely intertwined. So when the Trump administration raised tariffs against foreign auto companies, and when those countries retaliated against America's trading partners, that would hurt workers in South Carolina, where BMWs are assembled and then shipped around the world. In the realm of security interests, identifying the proper mix of tools from diplomacy, economic pressure, and or the threat or use of force. Again, when should we be using those kinds of tools? As president, Donald Trump demanded NATO allies pay a larger share of their collective costs of defense, and often questioned the enduring value of NATO. And recently, he basically said, if a European NATO ally was threatened with invasion and they hadn't paid their dues into NATO, he would say to Vladimir Putin, "Do whatever the heck you want with those folks." I think that's a terribly short-sighted viewpoint, but again, this is the world we're living in now. So the goals of foreign policy, that refers to, again, programs and policies that determine America's relations with other nations and with foreign entities. The three main foreign policy aims include security, prosperity, and improving the quality of life for all people. That's sort of the humanitarian goal. So let's jump into this one. Security, again, Americans view national security as the most important goal of foreign policy. While traditional national security interests focused on the threats posed by other nations, like Nazi Germany during World War II or the Soviet Union during the Cold War, today U.S. foreign policy has to be concerned with the actions of increasingly hostile non-state actors. The concept of security is a very broad term. So in addition to the preservation of the physical security of Americans, the federal government has to be concerned with preserving the security of food supplies, transportation infrastructure, and energy supplies. Much of the U.S. focus on commitment, in the Middle East, commitments in the Middle East, is evidence of the U.S. commitment to secure oil supplies from that region. 3/4 of the world's proven oil reserves are found in the Middle East. Cyberspace has added another security dimension to U.S. security efforts, and we have people that specialize in cybersecurity that work to interdict the efforts of hostile governments, groups, or even individual hackers to damage computer networks across sensitive or proprietary information. So several countries are notable for their attempts to gather intelligence and harm U.S. interests, including China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, among others. From the founding well into the 20th century, most Americans believed that that our geographic remoteness would preserve its security, and that fed what was it was a political isolationism. Isolationism was built into U.S. national security doctrine. George Washington's farewell address warned Americans to avoid permanent alliances with foreign powers. In 1823, President James Monroe articulated the Monroe Doctrine, which warned foreign powers not to meddle in the Western Hemisphere. Washington's warning and the Monroe Doctrine formed the cornerstone of U.S. national security doctrine until the end of the 19th century, and combined with the doctrine of manifest destiny, the U.S. viewed its national security interests as best served by avoiding entangling alliances, preventing foreign interventions into the American hemisphere, and securing national expansion from the east to the west coast of the continental United States. World War I, World War II, and the doctrine of containment. The United States' entrance into World War I was putatively to save the world for democracy. That led to the creation of the League of Nations and the U.S. return to isolationism following the war. World War I was also a war that was one of the first American kind of propaganda efforts. The Woodrow Wilson administration used the Committee on Public Works to basically persuade and shape the American public's view of World War I as, in that 3 or 4 year period while it was waging and the United States was not engaged. The United States, in the aftermath of World War I, basically returned to isolationism, and the interwar years, the 20 or 21 year old period between World War I and World War II saw the rise of fascist Italy, Germany, and Japan. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. entrance into World War II, basically led to the rise of U.S. multilateralism, which supplanted isolationism as the dominant way of looking at foreign policies. The post-World War II rivalry with the Soviet Union basically ensured that the United States would retain a multilateral, engaged, perspective on foreign policy. And one thing that happened was, in the interwar years, a lot of Europeans thought that they could appease Hitler. And so appeasement in the aftermath of World War II is a dirty word. And if you're calling someone's policies of appeasement, that's the kiss of death. And so one thing that does happen, the Soviet Union behaves aggressively in the aftermath of World War II to establish their own sphere of influence. That led some Americans to question the motives of the Soviet Union and led to the articulation of the idea of containment as a strategy for ensuring that United States national interests would be best served. You also had, again, the development of nuclear weapons in this period, and that creates sort of a, what do you have to think about? How do you think about nuclear weapons? And the whole idea of nuclear weapons is embodied in the idea of deterrence. You have the capacity to destroy an entire country, and eventually the United States and the Soviet Union have the capacity to destroy the world many times over, thousands of times over, with their huge nuclear stockpiles. In the aftermath of the Cold War in 1989, the Soviet Union collapsed, and we had about a 22-year period of relative peace until the attacks in 2001 by Al Qaeda on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. So you had this idea for about a generation of this peace dividend, that we could cut spending on defense and begin investing in human capital. However, the 2001 attacks by Al Qaeda basically created the war on terrorism. And a critical aspect of that was a really aggressive approach by the Bush administration, including the articulation of the Bush Doctrine, which is basically an argument that we would not wait around. If we had clear evidence that someone intended to attack us, that we would attack first. The Obama administration's foreign policy was less aggressive, but it was very, nevertheless quite aggressive. Obama used drones in ways that the Trump administration simply did not. In 2017, Donald Trump's adopted an alternatively belligerent tone with some of America's adversaries, most notably with North Korea, although towards the end of his one term, he became, in his own words, good friends with Kim Jong-un. Conversely, he also spoke quite often favorably of many of America's rivals, like Xi Jinping in China and Vladimir Putin in Russia, saying basically that they were admirable because they were strong. Meanwhile, speaking of European allies and NATO allies in thinly veiled contemptuous terms. So this is spending, and if you look, those are billions of dollars on the right. So our spending on defense is, it's approaching $800 billion annually, and it's averaged probably $500 or $600 billion. That dwarfs the total spending of the world on military, weapons, on defense and things like that. Economic prosperity is another important goal. America's international economic policies are intended to expand employment opportunities in the United States, to maintain access to foreign energy supplies and markets, and to promote foreign investment in the United States and lower prices that Americans pay for goods and services. Trade policy is a key element of U.S. international economic policy. The United States is the world's largest importer and exporter of goods. In 2017, it exported more than $2.3 trillion in goods and services while importing $2.9 trillion. Roughly 40 million jobs in the U.S. are directly or indirectly tied to international trade. U.S. trade policy involves complex arrangements of treaties, tariffs, and other mechanisms of foreign policy. America has a complicated relationship with free trade. Most Americans benefit from free trade policies. For example, consumer electronics would be far more expensive if they were not imported from around the world. At the same time, many American industries and their employees are hurt by free trade in factories, with factories and jobs moving to other countries. One of Donald Trump's main campaign pledges was to end free trade policies that he characterized as harmful for American workers. And in 2018, President Trump imposed tariffs on numerous foreign imports that sparked retaliation from U.S. trading partners. While some American manufacturers benefited from the tariffs, others were harmed. Ironically, America's farm states generally supported Trump in both 2016 and 2020, but American agricultural exports were hurt by the trade wars that the president's actions had provoked. International trade organizations. The United States is a member of the most important international organization for promoting trade, which is the World Trade Organization. The WTO basically is designed to basically adjudicate trade conflicts and to promote free trade. The WTA grew out of what had previously been known as the General Agreement on Tariff and Trades, otherwise known as GATT. GATT was kind of ended in the 1970s. The United States has also joined regional arrangements designed to reduce trade barriers, including the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which replaced the North American Free Trade Agreement in 2018. Human rights. While some Americans believe we should solve our problems at home, many Americans believe the United States has an obligation to protect human rights internationally. This is an important source of America's soft power, and soft power refers to the attractiveness of a country's ideals and culture, which enhances a country's ability to attract allies and dissuade rivals and enemies. The United States has long-standing commitments to human rights and is party to most international human rights agreements, but are often likely to overlook human rights violations by its major trading partners and military allies. As the world's wealthiest nation, the United States also recognizes an obligation to assist nations facing crises. Between 2010 and 2017, the United States provided more than $5 billion in assistance to Haiti after a huge earthquake devastated the island nation. In 2020, the United States also provided assistance to the Republic of Uzbekistan after a dam collapse displaced 70,000 people. Likewise, again, the COVID-19 pandemic revealed the limits on international cooperation in the face of international emergencies, as, again, all too often, governments were more interested in protecting their own citizens and protecting their own economies, and so often retrenched rather than retain their commitment to free trade. So that's it for this presentation. When we come back, we will continue our discussion of American foreign policy. I'll see you next time.